Croeso I Credu trwy Weld. Welcome to Seeing is Believing, exploring the potential for community action to serve the well-being of land and people. We know that co-production and the involvement of communities in policy and practical delivery are widely acknowledged as really key to finding solutions to complex problems. However, stewarding sort of more healthy, productive ecosystems and cultivating stronger communities are often framed as separate and with competing demands. I'm sure this will be familiar to you. So this session today is led by Jasmine Dale and is an opportunity to reflect and share learning from our diverse perspectives and identify some practical approaches that are mutually beneficial to people and places. There will be an interview with Ben Porter from Tyrd Canol as part of the workshop, but I'd like to hand over to Jasmine, who we're really delighted to be leading this workshop. Jasmine's a freelance facilitator with many years of experience in the field of ecological resilience, supporting practical solutions arising from insight at a community level. So I'd like to hand over to Jasmine. Thank you very much.
Okay, Pnawn da pawb. Thank you so much for everybody turning up here today. As Jessie said, we're going to be looking at the mutually beneficial outcomes for people and places, which in my experience is they're not separate outcomes, they're mutually beneficial. So what works for places can work for people as much, if not more. So as Jessie said, it'd be great because we're quite a big group. There won't be time for personal introductions, but it'd be really interesting to see in the chat your name, where you're coming from, and if you've got any particular aspirations for what you'd like to get out of this session. So we're going to have the film from Tyrd Canol and their experience of co-designing in Mid Wales, looking for the possibilities and the challenges of meeting the needs of thriving ecosystems and thriving community outcomes. So that's that. But the main body of the workshop, we're going to be doing a very focused activity to share and develop ideas where hopefully we can get some actual practical collaboration within this room, just as a sort of, on one end of the scale, it's just an experiment to see if we can collaborate in a very tight time scale. But at the other end, it's actually quite an optimistic that we might get some practical outcomes and real steps we can take forward. So that's the thing, the film and then the focused activity. But before we get into the film, I like to use the thermometer, which is a quick check-in technique. It's a very delicate but accurate machine. So it'd just be nice to see today, how are people feeling? Thermometer, this is I'm feeling good, obviously to middling, to feeling divlas or full. So how are we on the thermometer? Oh my goodness, this is very positive. Yeah, because I'm actually more a bit here. I'm a little bit on the brink of allergy potentially. Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you very much. So I suppose everybody's putting in their who they are, where they're coming from, which is like getting our brains churning around opportunities for collaboration. And we've got the thumbs up, so we know it's all good to go. So in that case, we'll hand over to Tom, today's technical wizard, who works for Together for Change, to put on the Tyrd Canol film, and then we'll have a little bit of feedback before going into our collaboration activity. Thank you.
We're here today to talk about Tyrd Canol. Could you tell me a bit about the vision and blueprint of Tyrd Canol?
So the vision and blueprint of Tyrd Canol was formed through a whole different sort of series of co-design workshops. So the blueprint itself has come from hundreds of different people's input through the whole of the area between sort of Llanidloes, Aberystwyth and Machynlleth in Mid Wales. The vision is obviously, because it's been inputted by 100 people, it's quite broad. It's a vision of people and nature coexisting and being able to develop a sort of thriving rural economy and landscape, environment, ecology in this area of Mid Wales in a way that supports farmers, people working on the land in the sea, local communities to go forwards in the coming decades in a way that is sustainable, that's like possible to maintain long term and isn't going to be degrading the environment that we're living in.
How and why then? What was the purpose of it?
How and why? It's a really good point. So the original Tyrd Canol itself, before it was Tyrd Canol, when it was this project called Summit to Sea, which was a bit of a disaster, that project. It came out of a place of there being sort of vanishing wildlife and nature, and across the whole of Wales we've got 1 in 7 species is threatened with extinction. We've lost over 80% of our insects in the last 100 years, and there's 70% decline in things like curlews. We've all but lost things like corncrake, salmon from the Dovey, from the rivers, things like that are vanishing. So like is being experienced across the world, this sort of complete loss of biodiversity and diversity across the landscape was one of the sort of galvanizing forces behind getting together a project to address this. In the original instance of the stages, it was a complete disaster in how they went about producing a project that sort of addresses these things. Initially it was really top down. A handful of people developed a project idea that was then imposed upon this area around us. Out of the sort of car crash of that project, a whole bunch of people got together and said, well, how can we do it together across this whole area? How can we input everyone's voices around a broader set of needs, not just the sort of nature and ecology, but how that works in terms of people's livelihoods, in terms of farming the landscape and the challenges that are being experienced with climate change in the sort of rural sector. So the sort of second stage, the sort of how and why, was, well, things aren't working as it stands. We're losing soil from the landscape. Farming's not going to be possible in 10 years as the way we're going about it. So we need to do things differently. How can we do things differently where everyone's invested and feeding into the new ideas and ways of doing things in sort of local solutions to local and global problems, really?
And what would you say are the salient points of the blueprint?
The salient points, there's quite a few of them, really. I think the emphasis on the sort of blueprint itself is broken down into sort of 4 or 5 different sort of elements, really. You've got sort of land and sea management, so working with people both in the sort of marine area and in the sort of terrestrial areas around the sort of way that we manage the land and the sea, and to look at more sustainable ways. That's one element. Research and development is another thing that came out, trying to understand more about the landscape around us and how things are changing and what's impacting those things, as well as the people, and how can we produce new sort of research projects that are linked in with local institutions, Aberystwyth University and others, and bring in a lot of different expertise that's around this area. Another element is human connections, so recognising that everyone in Wales and here is deeply connected to the places that we are living in and the landscape, and so recognising that and trying to understand if there are areas that are more sort of like disconnected, where people can't access sort of natural spaces, how can we sort of marry up those things to be able to allow everyone in these areas to really benefit from the sort of natural landscape and connect to the sort of natural world for the benefit of mental health, well-being, all of these different elements, really. So there's a few of the salient points, I think, that came out.
Fantastic, thank you. And how do you, Tir Canol, support ownership of priorities? How do you prioritise and for the enablers and the barriers that Tir Canol have to confront?
Brilliant, yeah, that's a good question. So how do the sort of processes that are embedded in Tir Canol as it stands sort of enable broad ownership of the project, both in terms of addressing the sort of barriers and the opportunities? And that, I think, a sort of core principle of Tir Canol is coming down to that element of co-design, which was the huge transfer of the sort of way that this project operates from when Summit to Sea existed, which was a top-down approach, an idea imposed on the landscape. Tir Canol was formed of 2 or 3 years of careful co-design, listening to people, taking those ideas away, feeding that back to people in different workshops, and then taking those sort of reactions and ideas, and then again just slowly sort of having that two-way formation. And I think the key thing there is, in terms of ownership, you bring in hundreds of people that have real sort of stake in that project because they've put in ideas and they've seen that those are being taken into account and have formed into the new project. So that ownership is real and is there. And I think the important thing is that even though Tir Canol itself now has been formed through the co-design, that doesn't stop. There's the sort of challenge, I guess, and the difficult thing is to ensure how do we sort of make sure we still have that sort of two-way process going forward, so that even though it was just formed from that sort of 2-year period, how do we have that continuing forward so that people still have that two-way thing of like, we do still have ownership and can see that those ideas that were fed in are sort of translating to action on the ground. And I think it's a barrier in that it takes a lot of time, and it can be frustratingly slow from the perspective of someone, for instance, like myself, who sees all the sort of wildlife and natural landscapes just vanishing around us, and CO2 emissions rising, and the sort of desperate need to like try and act and do something, marrying that up with the process that can take years and years and years, but builds momentum slowly, and I think then ensures a long burner that things will change on that landscape scale. So I guess it's sort of looking at these things and sort of seeing how they play out sort of longer term really, and making sure that people are invested in it, which they much more are if it's through the sort of co-design sort of way of going about it.
Thank you. Next point to discuss then is the collaboration and working in partnership. Why and how across sectors and different communities?
Yeah, so collaboration and working in partnerships are a massive part of Tyrd Canol, and I'd say that's one of its sort of core example of like how a sort of project at landscape scale can work. Is the only way to do that is through sort of partnerships and collaborating. You can't, for instance, in Scotland with projects that are looking at working at landscape scale, you've got one landowner, and you might have a couple of NGOs working with that landowner to do something on that huge patch of land. Where we are in Mid Wales, you've got hundreds of different landowners, be it sort of farmers or people that just own land that sort of private landowners, forestry, and you've got thousands of people in local communities, as well as the institutions, different NGOs, community groups. There's like a massive, intricate sort of ecosystem really of individuals and organisations and land workers and fisher people in this area. So the only way that you can have a chance of looking at changing the way we do things longer term is by coming together, trying to meet the middle ground, which is what Tyrd Canol means in English, is middle ground, and finding those sort of strong partnerships. And it's all based on relationship at the end of the day. No matter what badge you're wearing in terms of the organisation or institution, at the end of the day, it's sort of meeting in person, knowing the other person and respecting each other's sort of values, even if you disagree, coming to that place of being able to move forward with some sort of collaboration. So I think it's a huge part of Tyrd Canol. It can be very hard work a lot of the time, trying to just literally communicating all the time with lots of different people. It is quite, it is a massive amount to hold if you're trying to, I guess, coordinate a lot of that. Within my role, when I was working as the nature officer within Tyrd Canol, working with a lot of the different environmental NGOs and different farmers and landowners to look at ways of creating different habitats and looking at improving biodiversity on land. It was a really exciting part of the project to work in partnership with lots of different organisations and pull in different expertise, and that sort of that sort of intricate web has more resilience as well. So it's a hard one to get your head around sometimes because it's such a massive beast, but it's a really great part of the project.
Thank you. All right, so we've mentioned Tyrd Canol and finding the middle ground, and you have talked about some challenges. Are there any other challenges that you might have confronted?
Yeah, finding the middle ground. Yeah, Tyrd Canol's sort of ambition really in the choice of that name when the new project was launched. I think the name itself counters the sort of challenges to it. If you're going forwards with a set idea and a set sort of idealistic image of how you want things to be, it's quite hard to sort of do that sometimes unless you're willing to, I guess, surrender some of your, idealistic outcomes and actually come to the middle ground and come to compromises. And a lot of people don't like compromises. They want to do it, one way and are set on that, which works in some cases, but just not in this sort of landscape in the way that we're trying to go about things. The middle ground is often come through things like the co-design workshop, where you have loads of different points of view and ideas about how things work. And initially, everyone's really clinging tightly to those and those viewpoints and standpoints. And you can see that in some of these workshops where we do the sort of facilitated spaces, and you can see that people have that viewpoint. And through really careful listening and processes, you can see that people in the right environment are able to slowly sort of understand where others are coming from, see what they need and are wanting, and vice versa. And through sort of hearing why people do things in certain ways, for instance, farmers, a lot of environmentalists will just completely slag off farmers because they're destroying the environment, but a lot of that is just incentives from government, and people often don't understand that farmers are literally squeezed between supermarket prices and incentives from government to do things in a specific way. And so without that understanding, and in those sort of workshops of, okay, why are you actually doing things in that particular way, coming to the sort of understanding of it's not possible to just completely leave the land to go wild and get an income from not really getting any produce from that land. You need to be able to understand those sort of different viewpoints and come to a place of understanding. So I think Tír Canol is striving to do that. It's a challenge in that if you have groups that do have that idealistic view and you're trying to work in a workshop where you're bringing those in with, for instance, sort of angling communities and farmers and shooting communities with conservationists, there's going to be tensions and things, but I think the great thing is finding the sort of common values. That's always the best way to go about these sort of workshops, is what are we all in agreement on? We all want a sort of viable future with, water that's not polluted and, places that we can, swim and, our children can go out, and enjoy wildlife in the landscape, coming to those sort of common values, even if we have disagreements with other things, what are those sort of common values in the middle ground that we agree on? I guess that's maybe one of the key things.
And you touched on the future there, and you visioned a bit of the ideal future for Tír Canol. What about the horizon? What else is on the horizon for Tír Canol, and in terms of sustainability and nature?
So I guess at the moment it feels like Tír Canol is just in the beginning of its next stage, really. We've had this 2.5 years almost of co-design, forming the ideas, having the input of everyone to this new element of project. And we're only now really in the early stages of starting to build momentum and delivering that and having the action on the ground. And that's been dependent on funding up till now. But I think the really exciting thing is slowly engaging with more and more people again around the landscape, with more farmers and landowners, and slowly starting to work with more and more people around the area that can link in and start to have more of that sort of ownership and buy-in of, people have heard a lot about the ideas sort of battered around for Tír Canol, but maybe haven't necessarily seen any action and change on the ground yet. And I think as we have a few case study examples of what Tír Canol looks like in action, we'll have more people coming in, seeing that and being like, oh, I'd like to trial doing this in this area and trial this way of doing sort of really sustainable farming sort of system. And because we'll hopefully have that sort of intricate web of connections across the landscape, we can marry that up with Aberystwyth University to do some research and sort of bring that in to look at that. And I think building up that really sort of diverse web of interactions and connections and exciting sort of case study examples of all sorts of different things, not just in terms of the sort of land side of things, but the sort of culture and the sort of community elements. And I think slowly, we'll see that sort of momentum building, and that sort of, I guess I see Tír Canol as a bit of a catalyst to sort of really invigorating a lot of these things to happen across the landscape. I mean, ultimately, it'd be amazing to see certain, species returning, biodiversity, the sort of real evidence on the ground that things are working. And it's a massive ambition because it's a huge area that we're working with. So I guess in terms of the next steps, we're sort of slowly building that sort of momentum and engaging with more people across the landscape and allowing that space for more ownership of the project, so that things can really move forwards and include as many people in the area as possible, really.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for your insightful answers.
Yeah, no worries.
Okie dokie. So I'm interested to have a bit of feedback on that. Maybe there's some stuff that you disagreed with, or maybe there's things that you thought were novel ideas, or whatever. I'm just anything that occurs or that springs to mind. Would anyone like to share a reflection? Otherwise, you'll just have to hear mine, which will not be so interesting.
Sorry, I can't remember how to put my hand up. Oh yeah, I found it.
Just, we're a fairly reasonable sized group. Go for it.
Okay, yeah. No, I was really interested in what because he's bringing so many different people together from different backgrounds and different values and views, that it was about finding what they all want. And I thought that was really important. And that was probably the biggest thing I took away from the whole video, really, and finding common values between people who might not see eye to eye, and the middle ground. And obviously I hadn't realised that that was where the name Tir Canol came from. But yeah, I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, good. And there's really interesting ways out there to bring together diverse viewpoints and find overlap. And Jessie's got her hand up.
Yeah, diolch, Jasmine. I think similarly to Gwenno, so many of the views when we're thinking about our environment and land are very polarized. And I mentioned earlier on that the two news items that we're seeing are around the farming protests in London today. And I think sort of those polarizing views, this idea that if we collectively find the common ground, it's a much sort of healthier way of being able to work forward, seems to be particularly pertinent at the moment, given what's happening in the country. So yeah, I thought it was really good, great, really interesting.
Yeah, I do myself have got like this long background in training landscape solutions that benefit people, and my experience is that they don't have to be trade-offs at all. You know, if you've got a problem with water runoff, but you've also got a need for something else, that actually very strong design comes from meeting both outcomes. So I find it frustrating if I see things shown as opposing or polarizing outcomes. Yeah, so Rachel's in there in the chat. She can't speak because she's in the office, but she was interested to hear about the top-down not working, which she says, I guess we all know, and the importance of co-creation. So, or maybe some of you are thinking right now about experiences in your own day-to-day job, or maybe in your personal communities where co-creation has or hasn't worked, or where top-down or bottom-up works. So that's also, if anyone wants to bring in stuff that's related to the film but fits outside of the direct topics that I mentioned. Gwendolyn?
It's not quite directly to that, but I thought it was interesting how he talked about the movement from co-creation to co-delivery, and the frustrations in that, and the honesty of being frustrated in that, and how if you try and bring these things back down to the reality of people's lives, which is what he was talking about, wasn't it? About like kind of working from where people were at forward, how that takes time, and we have to allow ourselves to take that time. And for some of us who are passionate about a certain topic, whether it's environment or other, people, it can be very like, I want to get this done. But having to step back and allow yourself space to do that together.
Yeah, great, interesting. Yeah, so the realities of what it takes to co-create shared set of common value ideas into actually delivering a practical plan. So we've got a couple of more hands up. And Rianne?
Yeah, just building on Gwendolyn's comment, I think that time and that time to reflect and learn came through. He started, I think, saying that the previous project, hadn't worked, but actually there was still a motivation to take, from where they were with something that didn't work to where they are now today. It struck me that there was still that motivation, but it was around taking time to bring everybody in, and a really diverse set of stakeholders, community members, landowners, and that diversity, I suppose, of across community really struck me as well. That kind of inclusive approach was key to being able to drive the project forward, albeit recognising that compromise was required along the way.
Yeah, well, that's great. Thanks. Yeah, diversity, what they call it, the productive edges, when you get what seems like disparate points of view can often make the strongest outcomes. AD from Pacto has put in the chat about the importance of having a good mediator or facilitator, because of differences will come out despite common values, that have some strong techniques or a strong facilitator in the space. Yeah, good point. Thank you. Tom?
Thank you. Hopefully you can hear me. I'm not sure, I might have missed it in the video actually, but is the area that they're talking about there, is that within the national park? I don't know whether Gwenno knows about that.
I was just on their website having a look, and I can't see a map which shows exactly where they are. But they do talk about the Dyfi area, so I think maybe they are, because it's Powys, where Gwynedd really, but there's the Dyfi estuary, that sort of area might be in the park. I know we do a lot of work with Ben Porter anyway, beyond this project. Some of his, he does photography and stuff, doesn't he? But yeah, so I think he is in touch with the park, but I don't know exactly the area of this project.
Yeah, I was just thinking, because in previous existence, I worked for the National Park in Pembrokeshire and have been sort of involved in trying to develop their kind of engagement practice and so on. And like many public bodies, I think it is a very new way of approaching, managing areas, dealing with conflict and so on, and quite often seem to prefer for that to be done by an outside body rather than the authority leading on that. So it was just interesting on that perspective, really.
Yeah, I just noticed that Gwendolyn's from the co-production network for Wales, I think, and I've just done a course with them actually. So we're kind of trying to develop those practices in-house as well, hopefully. But I think it'll take a bit of time to embed, and like a bit of a culture shift. But it's something that we're looking to do moving forward, definitely.
We're actually fairly spacious for time at the moment, so I'm just interested in your day-to-day jobs or your personal experience, whether it's common for what you do to collaborate with other organisations, or whether you tend to have to work just within your departments. There's a few slight nods. Who's has to collaborate all the time with different bodies and different individuals? Yeah, I think at least half the people that we can see anyway. So okay, so any other reflections on that film before we start working together on our own co-designs?
I was just thinking how nice and warm it looks.
Yeah. Yeah, indeed. Well, yeah. So, okay, so what we're going to do now then with the rest of the time is we're going to use an activity that's designed for with fair numbers of people to get some actual practical ideas brewing when you've only got a short amount of time. Okay, so that's what we're going to spend the time on. And so we're going to, first of all, I'm going to set you a question, and we're going to think about that alone, and then we're going to go into pairs, and then we're going to see if we can work up some ideas into like specific practical outcomes. So fingers crossed, calling in the gods of collaboration. So I'd like you just to, for a minute, I'm going to give you a timing, but have a think about your organisation, and I'd like you to identify an environmental impact it has. And it might be interesting just to focus on your own organisation rather than thinking like about the users of your organisation, like draw it right back to what your actual group does. And I'd like you to think about an environmental impact. You might be best to go with one of the first ones you come to, and it could be something like products, services, like a procurement thing, or it could be the energy, or it could actually be the impact your building has on being in a particular piece of land. Could be water-based, could be waste-based. Those are the sort of things we mean when we're saying environmental impacts, or they mean. And so I want you to pick one impact and then conjure up a potential route to a co-designed solution. So it might be, I'd like all the food for my local authority to be procured from local farmers. That would require me to work with X or something like that. So we're going to have 1 minute, and just can you write it please down as a sentence, because you're going to need to share it very concisely with someone else in a pair with a time limit on that. So one impact and a potential route. And you can be fairly ambitious, you know, because this is an experiment as much as anything. So please feel free to write down something that's a bit of maybe a dream, even if you don't think it's practical in person. So I'll set the timer now. Oh, didn't know it did that. Okay, so looks like most people have managed that. I've not stopped writing yet. Thank you. So we've got a bit of a thumbs up, managed to write something. Even if you're not satisfied with it, we've got something. Great. So young Tom, he's the technical meister today. He's going to put us into pairs in a second. And so what I'd like you to do is you're only going to have a couple of minutes. So just take it in turn to share concisely what you've just written. And that probably is most efficient to just read out your one sentence. Yeah. And then I would like you to look for overlap or some common ground and generate a shared idea that might be going a bit off of your own organisation's remit, but just see if you could, it might be very much something that you can practically both keep within the impacts of who you work for. So you're going to read it out, each person take a turn, look for some overlap or common ground and generate a shared idea. And then, fairly key, you're going to write that down as a concise statement. Yep. And actually we are, I think we'll just go with that with the 3 minutes to share. So can I just check that everybody's okay with that? Yeah, and you'd be open to that there hopefully be some correlation. So shared idea in pairs. And Tom will separate us out in a sec. I'm glad it's not me doing that, by the way. Because...
Okay, ready to go?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I think it might look like Saffron is in a room on her own. Shall I just go in there?
I'm gonna. Well, I was going to go in. You could go in.
Okay, you go in then. Yeah, you go in. Thank you. Okay, we've made it this far.
Yeah, we have made it this far. And I'm really delighted how much people are interacting and getting involved. It's really
they look reasonably, they don't look hacked off, do they? They're all right at the moment.
no, definitely not hacked off. So how long? They've got 2 minutes. It goes quickly, doesn't it?
Well, I gave them 3 actually. When the strict way of doing it is to get 1 minute, 2 minutes, 4 minutes.
Right.
My friend who works for the health board, she's a big advocate of this technique, and she's very strict on the 1, 2, 4 minutes. But I thought we're actually very ahead for some reason. So it means we can be quite gentle.
Yeah, I think so. And people often like to have a bit more time to share.
Yeah, I mean, in a face-to-face or workshop, I would probably might happily give people, much longer to this, like 15 minutes or so. But there's yeah, the liberation structures techniques. They're like a sort of big facilitation set of people. A lot of their techniques are very 1 minute this, 2 minute that, and they've been done to me quite often in trainings, and I do find that they are surprisingly effective. And it does rely on people being able to focus like that.
It's it enforces being quite strategic with your time.
Yeah. Well, in DTA Wales, we used to have I don't think it's necessarily now, but on the big mentor pool, some of us, myself probably included, were prone to really ramble on. This lady called Megan Evans always used to be doing our trainings, and she was always giving us the 1 minutes, and it seemed to control us quite well.
Yeah.
So I put down as my one, instead of for the organisations, I put the water runoff from my house, and I might like to make some marginal pond systems, and that I'd need to work with my 2 neighbour farmers, the National Park, who own the next field, and also all the species. I'd work with them.
Right.
Did you do it? Did you think of did you?
I sort of did, but I also thought I could, I was also sort of thinking that I was conscious of what other people might be doing. So perhaps, I think they're all about to come back.
They are.
Okay.
Hey, we've got some smiles, so that means something reasonable happened there then.
Just a good chat, I think.
Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah, well, I will apologise about doing this sort of really brief interaction sort of method, but sometimes it works very well, and because we're not 32 after all, we will hopefully have plenty of time to discuss in a less aggressive way. So now, hopefully you've got your sort of concise statement that you've made in pairs, and we're going to, with the magic of the breakout rooms again, we're going to put each pair in with another pair, and if you read out your shared idea in turn and have a little discussion, and see if you can generate, like an emergent idea, a third proposal that sort of, it could be quite ambitious, again, why not? We're just playing with this, and some sort of proposal that supports both healthy and productive ecosystem landscape outcomes, as well as thriving, resilient communities. So, and then we're going to bring those right back to share with everybody and have a chat and see if we can find any overlaps or links. So does that make sense? You're hopefully, with your pairs, you're going to go back with the same person, but with a new pair, and share your ideas, see if out of that comes a proposal that you could make as an idea, and then we're going to all come back together for the remaining time. So we actually, because everybody's being very good, very, very good, 10 out of 10. We can actually go to 3:30 with this one, potentially. So I don't know, let's have 12 minutes. Well, Tom's got a thought. He's on
more a question, because of the numbers of people, it doesn't really work to put 2s and 4s. So should I keep me and Saffron, who were together, or should I split us up?
Right, so what does it mean we've got
2 rooms of 4
with one other pair?
Yeah,
so they can either go with me, or they could just go in with another pair. What do you want to do, spare pair? Who is the spare pair?
Saffron.
Just Saffron.
We'll come in with you, and then we get more richness.
Yeah, cool. So we're going to go to just have like let's go to near 3:30, so something between, let's go for the 12 minutes. Is that clear enough then for everybody what we're going to do? Just notice we're a very female environment today, aren't we? thought that there was some other people here, but maybe my screen's.
Can I ask a quick question, Jasmine?
Of course.
You said something about a proposal. I didn't quite catch it. Or healthy and productive landscapes, and something else. You said social.
And thriving communities. So just like on the main idea that we're looking at, that there's a proposal that will serve both an environment, is a good outcome both for the environment and for the people. And I do apologise that we have to refer to those two things as separate, because they are, of course, we are part of the environment, but for the basis of we're still sort of trapped in that language. So it's a proposal that would benefit both the people and the place. So, for example, I've got loads of water running off my field or off my building. It creates flooding, which is annoying for people, and erodes soil. So I might come up with a proposal for something that makes sense.
But it's combining the two sets of ideas from each pair.
Doesn't have to be exactly strictly, but you're going to share those two ideas to see if they spark a third idea.
Oh, so it can be completely new.
Yeah, it could be actually. Yeah, it does. Okay. Sometimes people come out with a completely new idea. It's just that stimulates some thinking, and other people seem to come up with a merged idea.
Right. Okay.
But great. Yeah, we're all right with that. We can handle it. It's a Tuesday afternoon in November.
Cool.
So for this next 15 minutes, then we'll have the feedback. So excuse my mathematics, even though I do have an O level in it. But how many groups are we dealing with here? Three. So group one, that was us, and so we're going to call upon Saffron to share our ideas. We've got about a minute to share our worked up proposal.
Okay, I'll be quick. So we came up with two kind of end ideas from consolidating everyone's ideas. So one of them is to create a kind of dating app for funders, so funders can get more involved with bringing together stakeholders with similar interests to put together a bid. So that avoids kind of overlap or any duplication, and also would hopefully be more attractive for funders and for those applying for funding as well. And then the other idea, which we could use the funding for, would be to develop mobility hubs. So I work for Newport City Council, so we took Newport as the example, to develop mobility hubs across the city, and that links together multiple types of transport, so cycling, buses, trains, EV chargers, car sharing, all in one space, link them with corridors, kind of wildflower corridors potentially throughout the city, and also have them themselves be kind of ecological areas with rainwater collection, while green roofs, green walls, etc. So that was our ideas.
Excellent. And I think Tom's sum up, he doesn't particularly feel like adding to that. So what do we reckon in the room then? What do you think? Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, and the mobility hubs, in case you didn't quite catch the idea that you could combine lots of different functions of lots of different things that people are trying to cart around.
The other, sorry, just to chip in, the other little extension was to, and it may be happening, I'm not really aware, is just to get main funders and probably government and so on to build that kind of approach into their strategy and program for the way they think about funding. So if there are certain people with certain ideas in a certain area, to kind of encourage them to come together more than perhaps happens at the moment.
Cool, thank you. So who would like to speak for group two? We can all probably have a go, really, but if one of you would like to deliver your proposal.
We don't know who group two is. Who's group two?
Oh, well, we'll go for the Pacto group, yeah.
Oh, okay. Shall I go then? So we focused on transport as well, and we decided on greener public and private transport, because we're focusing on like a rural area. It'd be difficult to do completely public. So we've got a list of things that would include, like lift sharing, greener fuels, green public transport that actually meets people's needs. Huge investment would be needed for the public transport, including more active travel and learning from Europe, like they have in certain cities with excellent public transport provision. And this would help to tackle fuel poverty and support ageing populations as well. And transport poverty, provision of education and nurseries that fit in with work. So it's about the bigger picture as well as just the transport itself, so that you have after-school clubs, preschool clubs near to the school. So there's less generation of journeys in the first place, was the main principle behind that. And another principle is improving trust and building up communities, because a lot of trust has been lost and a lot of more people are anxious around space sharing. So what can be done also from a big zoomed out perspective to support communities to feel more trusting of each other, to share lifts and that kind of thing. And whatever is provided in terms of public transport needs to cope with people's fears about sharing space. So that might be modern ways of making people feel safe in a shared space, and perhaps technological developments. And including certain provision, like a certain minimal provision of public transport that is statutory, so that going above and beyond what's currently statutory, which I think is largely around school transport, but something that goes beyond that. So there's more consistency, because if you're crossing boundaries, you can have really different experiences of transport. And to also mitigate for the action. So if you're making greener transport provision in the UK, that might actually negatively have impacts somewhere else in the world from the pollution of things like EV batteries. So thinking about how you can mitigate the damaging effects of having greener transport in the UK elsewhere in the world. So we just casually are going to work with everybody involved in all of those things, because you said we could be ambitious. So that was our plan.
Cool, thank you.
Missed anything? I think that was it, right? If I missed anything, let me know. But
so yeah, I think we've got where are we on the thermometer? Yeah.
Can I just say we weren't in the groups that we were in before. So Hannah and I were in a different group. So bless you, Hannah. Wow. I went on the other side.
I think I might need to apologise for that. Something happened with the group allocation. Sorry.
It was fine, but just Hannah and I we were on a different track, weren't we, before? So
yeah, sounds like it come up with something. So we will have a chance in a minute to cross discuss about this. But what about the other group then? Would you like to share what you came out with?
I'll feed us back. I think you guys have answered. We came up with a question, and I feel like the other groups might have answered it. So maybe we should have spent less time thinking about the question. But we were trying to, similarly, transport came out as pretty much the priority area that had been kind of as a conversation. Green energy as well, but you know, it kind of then turned more towards a transport conversation. And we were talking about, our question we sort of set ourselves was, how can a local circular economy support accessible and local green energy and transport infrastructure? So that was kind of, we spent some time sort of developing that question to sort of look at what we were bringing in, the different initiatives that we knew that were happening at the community levels, both in producing energy and in doing community transport opportunities and accessibilities in different areas across Wales, and how that looks differently. And then we talked about like how we need to create a system that joins those dots, because we seem to we kind of knew of little pockets of things happening, but there's nothing that sort of was bringing those together. So somebody who's producing some green energy here isn't necessarily linked up with that community transport that might need to like charge their bus. So it's kind of trying, how can we join those dots? And then also we had at the very end, we were having a conversation about the issue of the instability of those local organisations and initiatives because of the funding structures. And we need to have a system that puts in place sustainable longer term funding, so that it's not just, you know, a community transport thing that's put up for a couple of years and then it loses funding, and similarly it's not, you know, there needs to be a social enterprise aspect built into this so that both the localized energy companies and the transport companies can exist consistently. So we didn't have answers, we just had questions.
That sounds very intelligent to me, what you've just said. So there we are. So it's interesting that how much convergence there was then in terms of topics of concern. So, well, would anyone like to say anything, like any thoughts and reflection on what they've just heard? Or did they see any sort of maybe points of where something could be tweaked or something was either missed or not missed or so forth? Yes.
I think it's quite clear that as with a lot of things, the third sector ends up picking up a lot of the issues. And we are all grant dependent. So it's probably linked to that first group's element, really, around how you build that network of funders who can then work with a network of bidders at the same time. Because we've got 6 community transport organisations in Pembrokeshire,
wow,
which is brilliant. But sustainability is a big issue. My organisation is grant dependent. We've been fortunate that we've got funding over 3 years. Well, we're now starting our 2nd year, but I've got to go and look now for funding for another part of the team. So I'm always looking for funding.
So that's also been noted in the chat, and a couple of people mentioned, Amy also flagged up that part of what they saw was the need for high levels of investment. I'm just wondering if anyone's got any thoughts on, say, maybe a party that's operates transport who isn't struggling for cash, that's maybe driving all over the country already. Because I was just thinking about things like Amazon, for example. They're already driving everywhere, aren't they? Everybody's ordering stuff. So this is thinking about outside the box. But this problem of investment always, and yet there are elements within society that have they're not strapped for cash as such. Yeah, so I don't know, that would be quite a creative leap to make that, but
I think they probably are fine with a network of big lorries that then go to a warehouse, but that then gets disseminated into small little vans, which are driven in the main by independent people. So there is a big cut there between using the power of Amazon, if you like, to get it back down to where it's really needed.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, good thinking.
Well, I always think that there must be a resource somewhere in the existing system. It's just a case of tapping into it.
Well, I suppose we could turn the Pantechnicons, that's the big lorries, into half passenger carriers as well. So
that sounds cool. Yeah.
Or just package yourself up in a box and post yourself. Now, wasn't there somebody that did that? But actually on an aeroplane.
Wow. There's there's lots of things coming in the chat, Amy.
I was just going to say, in my previous work on the Transport and Health Integrated Research Network, we did some community discussions with people in Aberystwyth and the surrounding area that rely on a bus services that were being cut all the time, and we had got them to explore alternatives. And they said there used to be a post vans. They used to give people lifts around the countryside. So historically, there has been more of an emphasis on where there's something already exists, maximising the use of that. And we used to maximise the use of school buses, other kinds of buses, more so than we do now. And there's a complex set of reasons for that we were trying to unpick in the last work that I had, that we never quite got there because the funding ended. But just to reiterate that frustration that happens. But yeah, it just goes to show that it's possible. And sometimes it's changes in health and safety legislation that means that, or safeguarding, a lot of anxiety around safeguarding for young people in terms of young people not having their own bus for school, but sharing with other people and stuff. So there's less really clunky old, very polluting school buses on the road, for example. So yeah, there's quite a lot of interesting stuff to unpick there. And I have put a link to that Think project because there's loads of resources on there if people do want to pick up this specific issue around transport, if that's helpful.
Thank you. Yeah, so I know some people are saying in the chat they're having to leave for important things, but there is a short evaluation form for Together for Change also appeared in the chat. Well, it's a thorny problem, isn't it? It's making me think about, for years and years I was in green recovery food procurement workshops with local authorities and small producers, and they could never find a way to supply schools and hospitals with local produce because there was like a missing link in the thing. And as you may be aware, through some very careful work that's happened, there's now quite a considerable trial going on of putting the vegetables into local schools. But for years and years, that was for 10 years or at least, there's been a gridlock on that because the procurement, the meeting the private and public sector needs didn't add up. And that's to do with key actors stepping in and some people making compromises. So I am hopeful. I know I'm naive in the transport sector, but there's so many of you that are so committed and sensible involved in it. So we still do have some time. So given what we've done then and we've heard, I'd like to keep it optimistic and enthusiastic if possible, because I know with these topics, people get so tired out with year after year trying to find solutions and there being so many systemic difficulties involved. But does anybody feel that there is any links or next steps they could take following on from something they've heard from another party here today? Or is there anything that it actually offers an opportunity that you think could be followed up? Oh, well.
Well, I was going to say I sent an email linking Saffron and Amy together because like they did, but then Amy put the stuff in the chat anyway. Thanks, Amy.
There's a good connection here. I would say this.
I mean, I suppose I could say from this pause may be slightly indicative. Something that I've noticed in this kind of work is that you usually need an instigator. It's usually an external organisation that can tie all the pieces together. And without that linchpin, a lot of this collaborative, joined up thinking work just doesn't have the momentum. There can be an awful lot of desire, an awful lot of ideas, but because everybody's got their really, really busy day jobs, and often, and one thing I think is very important is that if people are interested in doing collaborative work, that their line manager, whoever deems them to have what they spend their time on for their allocated hours, gives them time to do this work. Because at the moment, in most organizations, there's nobody outwardly focused who takes information out and then feeds it back in and does that sort of motion. A lot of people do things in their lunch breaks or fit it in after work, and it's on top of what they're doing. There's not a huge amount of people who have this as a big part of the remit of what they do, and it's legitimized. And it's like, we are going to give you time to spend doing collaboration and finding out all those connections, because sometimes the fruition of that isn't shown for a few years. You've got to build the trust, you've got to build the knowledge, and then it comes to being, and then it becomes a big project and you get the funding and everything. But a lot of organizations, it's quite difficult for a line manager to make the argument for an investment in that when they've got all these other short-term things that need to be evidenced, So I really advocate, from my personal experience of trying to run lots of networks and being that linchpin person, do not underestimate the importance of funding for somebody like that if you're applying for a project, or supporting it within your own organisation, so that it's everybody really should have specific time that they are permitted to and encouraged to collaborate across departments and with external organisations. Because I'm always shocked at the amount of time large organisations like councils, for example, or NHS trusts, they don't really know what's happening across department from them, what's happening in another department. And if they did, there could be lots of efficiencies there. And it's purely just, everyone's got so much busyness happening. So it's just something I wanted to flag that might help.
Thank you. So so a few people here, I haven't heard much from you in the main room. I'm at the risk of opening a can of worms. Maybe you're sitting there just getting really disgruntled about green transport links or something now. I'm just wondering, do you want to, any of the few people that haven't had a chance yet to speak, do you want to add anything, as have like a final word on either an insight or takeaway from this, or it could be positive, negative, or neither?
No. It's just been interesting to hear the discussions that are going on, and I echo. I understand, and I just don't have the answers, but around funding and the fact that it's never long enough to do anything really meaningful, or you've got a couple of people who are constantly scrabbling around for it, when if they had something over a decent amount of time, would mean they could put their energies elsewhere. And just also what the last lady said, really, that I understand the frustrations as well around council departments not talking to each other and not joining up the dots, and that's from somebody who works within a council, and it drives me nuts on a regular basis. So I suppose there's nothing really to add other than it's always useful and helpful to take this time just to hear the discussions and to think about things and how things might be done differently.
Thanks, Hannah.
I'd reiterate that. One of the things that we've developed within the third sector here in Pembrokeshire is that networking element between anybody within the third sector and anybody where we join up with others delivering whatever services we do. But we have that networking ability, even if it's just bi-monthly, to be able to chat about what we're doing, so that we can make those connections, so that we don't end up in little silos. I think that's the thing. We can so easily do that. We get so engrossed in what we do that we forget to see what's happening around the corner or in the next street over, whichever. So I just reiterate that, really, that collaboration is important. Whether you actually have a product at the end of it or not doesn't matter. Yeah. The fact that you're having that discussion is a good start.
Thanks.
I would say that we have got some of the legislative tools in Wales to do this. If you took, I'm by far often talking about the frustration of the implementation of that. But the Future Generations Act, and the fact that both local authorities and also then they passed on through the funding to third sector is about that long-term thinking, that collaborative, that connection that you were talking about, Amy, that kind of building those links and creating that space. It's about perhaps for both the third sector and the public sector, it's frustrating to be in it, because actually the immediate pressures that we get for being busy don't allow us to do the implementation of that. But I think there's something about us collectively coming together to push back. How can we collectively come together to push back at that and say, well, you're asking us to deliver to this legislation. Give us the time, give us the space, allow us to do long-term thinking. Whether that's to higher up within the leadership of local authorities, but also I think pushing back at Welsh Government how they monitor local authorities to deliver on the Future Generations Act, because often they monitor in a very short-term way and not long-term thinking and not collaboratively. So it's kind of but sometimes can some of us that don't sit within that space be that voice back to those in power as well.
Oh, we're in power though, aren't we? Those elected people. Thanks. Very good to put, though. Very well, nicely put. So Jessie's got her hand up, and then there is the feedback form in the chat, which we really appreciate you doing, and thank you very much for coming. So Jessie.
Thanks, Jasmine. And I think those final comments about the systemic gaps is something that is very pertinent when when we're sort of thinking about what the future might hold, I think we're all very conscious of those opportunities. Much of the research that Together for Change have been doing over the last 6 months has indicated this, whether that be from the sort of frontline community-led organisation perspective, or whether that be about strategically about the anchor organisations that we've got in Wales, Co-Production being Network being one of them, Compass, WLGA. You know, there are things that are being experienced at strategic level and at that very frontline level around those systemic gaps. So opportunities to come together, opportunities to share resource. And it's certainly something that we as an organisation are pushing. And part of that is having events like this today. I think Gwendolyn's point about the policy landscape is so spot on, really. You know, we've got the Wellbeing Future Generations Act. I was at the Wellbeing Economy event yesterday, as I think Gwendolyn was also. I think I saw you in the crowd somewhere. So we've got the Act. We've got 7 goals. It's now got 5 missions as part of the Cymru Can, and the implementation and impact part is somewhere where I think we could really maybe make some movements. But certainly, I think all the frustrations exist. But I think the opportunities to collectively have this time to share and reflect are, for me certainly, and for others, I think really important. So thank you. I'll just let Jasmine say a few words and then I'll do some thanks and round things up. I'll hand back to you for a moment.
Okay, well, I just appreciate that you all took the time. You've all been constructive. I also feel sorry for anyone that's stuck in a frustrated situation, and I hope that some links can be made outside of here, or that you can come up with something very creative, bring back Shire horses, and who knows what the answer might be. So thanks again for your time, and that's all really. Thank you.
Okay, well, diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you for everybody for coming. Thank you for all the energy, some great discussions, and thank you to the Together for Change team. Thank you to the Resourceful Communities Partnership for supporting this work. We will be sending out all the materials from this event, and a report of the event and a recording will be available online in the coming weeks. So just to say thank you, please do complete the evaluation and hope you have a lovely afternoon.